Hello everyone, welcome to Let's Build Securely. We are talking today about some kind of a financial application that we can protect or we can overlook in AWS, right? This example of AWS architecture here you can find in the reference from AWS website. It's really important for you if you want to build some kind of a TLM application. This is called a transaction lifecycle management. This is used for a lot of financial automation and also post-trades that you can grab a big amount of data from your data center, from your office, and you want to process with EC2s in this example, but also you can archive some of those financial transactions in the S3 Glacier, okay? What we are going to do today here, it is doing a step back and reviewing some kind of security aspects in this architecture here that you can improve. Not saying this is not securely, okay, because you can see here you have an AWS WAF, you have a security hub right there that can add some kind of security aspects to this architecture here, but also it is really important if you read the security share responsibility model from AWS. There's a lot of aspects on that customer needs to take care on their own architectures when they are building things, okay? Today, Andre and I, we are going to do this step back and reflect about how we can improve in this architecture. Let's start this, Andre?
Let's do it. All right.
I think it would be awesome. The first thing, what do you think it is a good tip here in this case, Andre?
All right, so looking at this, there's definitely some, looks like a focus on the network security aspect here on the WAF.
Yeah.
Right, so whatever is coming to the EC2s.
With the users coming here to access the data, right?
So there is inspection going on there.
Yeah,
that's
correct.
Good. Very well. But another access to the EC2s that I'm looking at here
is
the S3. So the data has to be consumed on the EC2 instances for whatever is going to be the crunching that's going to be done there. But if you think about it, this is also a privileged position for an attacker.
Correct.
Right? If the attacker wants to bypass network inspections, one of the ways they could do it is just uploading malicious data directly to the buckets there. Of course, it's coming from a secure transaction via SFTP.
Yeah, it's all encrypted transaction on the data in
that takes care of encrypting the transport of the data, but not securing the data itself. So maybe one possibility that we can think about right away is responding to objects being dropped on S3.
That's a good idea, yeah, for sure.
Maybe we kick off a flow of verifying whether they're malicious.
Yeah, maybe we remove this boundary here that we created, and what we can do it is starting scanning every single object that lands in the S3 buckets, right? Can you explain more about this kind of use case?
Yeah, so it looks like we're going to use a Lambda function to scan this. Of course, to get the file to the Lambda function, there are methods to do that. But I think the point of using a Lambda function is so that we can respond to peak. We don't want to over-provision capacity. We want to be event-driven. So Lambda seems like a good fit here. There would be an anti-malware engine running on this Lambda function to verify whether the objects are malicious. I'm seeing another bucket there. Looks like this Lambda would also kick off a flow where objects that are deemed malicious would be then placed on that quarantine buckets.
This way we guarantee no malicious content go to the backup, right? But also we guarantee that not a crypto mining or ransomware or any malicious content hits the EC2s, right?
Exactly. So the files, the objects that would be accessible here would only be clean files. Well, perhaps to make sure that's really the case, right? So we want to make sure that the order, maybe we add a separate bucket, ingestion buckets, and then this bucket right here is a bucket that only good files are put there. So there are definitely ways of making sure.
What we can do is just tags the files here, right? If you be good file, you tag as a safe, and if you be malicious, we tag as malicious content, and we just move to this bucket, right?
That's a good point. If you're tagging the objects, you're allowing your developers, your application owners, the freedom of reading the tag and then reacting to those tags.
And they can do
whatever way they want.
Yeah, and they can do different workflows too. It's not saying you need to change completely the architecture, right? You're just adding an additional layer
Yeah.
with the native possibilities from AWS. the tech,
Ideally,
right?
you don't want to change the architecture much, right?
Yep.
Right. If this architecture has been already landed on, some thought has been given about it. So
I think this is amazing layer that you can add, or any customer can add like anytime. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Just adding a Lambda function with like a bucket as a quarantine and keeping the same bucket that they have before. I love it.
yeah, to make sure no malicious data is accessed via this privileged position here, right?
Yep.
But those are EC2 instances. You have some responsibility over them.
Yeah, EC2s, or maybe let me step one back here too. Say like we have a tons of like AWS services here, right? We have like, I don't know, like probably over 100 misconfigurations that we can find in different like services here, right?
Oh,
If
yeah.
you think about this, it's like how I can make sure every single service that I'm using here, they are properly aligned with the AWS Well Architecture framework, right? It is one of the reference how to build properly architectures in AWS. But also, since we are talking about financial services, you need to remember financial services needs to follow specifically regulatory compliances and standards called PCI DSS, right?
Oh yeah.
Really important for you to make sure every single services that you are here, it is applying the best practice from PCI DSS. This way you won't have any kind of like problem with the auditors, right? It is really important.
Yeah, you don't want to find out about misconfigurations only when the auditor
Yeah,
audits
yeah,
it.
for sure
It's a
not.
little too late.
One of the cool things that we can do here, it's maybe adding like a CSPM technology, Cloud Security Posture Management. What that means, right? It's basically, you can connect this kind of technology with your AWS infrastructure, and you can start reading every single configuration and validate it if they are using properly configuration associated or mapped with PCI DSS or Web Architecture Framework. That's a good way, right?
So it'd be great, right? So if you actually can do that in a recursive manner, right?
Yep.
Or even better,
Shifting left, maybe?
exactly. So if you can verify whether the services are properly configured on the infrastructure as code layer,
That'll be amazing.
then
Yeah.
you basically can verify what's running, and then you can take a step back and
Yeah.
make sure that those configurations
That's a
are
really
accessed.
good point, right? Imagine this is the real time, but also CSPM technology has capabilities as a template scanner that you can connect with their IDE, right, as a security plugin, or you can add as a CI/CD pipeline template scanner too, right?
Yeah, whatever pipelines you have in place that are building your infrastructure as code files, right, that will define your infrastructure. Yeah, let's look at that,
yeah.
scan that, and yeah, do so in real time after the delivery of the resources too would be important. You mentioned how 100 misconfigurations could be only solely here on this architecture. It's very true. EC2 has a big surface of possibility of misconfiguration, but S3,
Oh my lord.
I don't think we need
Yeah.
to go too much further, right? Everyone knows how S3, if it is improperly configured, can be a big surface.
Yeah, I think we're touching 2 tips here, right? Perfect.
Right.
You have a third one, I know that, right?
Yes.
As a security recommendation?
Yeah, so EC2 instances, right? So this is being leveraged. Still very good choice, depending on your flow. This is your compute choice here in this platform. This is general computing, right? So you're gonna run code here that can run, and you can run any codes on those EC2 instances. So yes, you gotta verify, right? What is running here? PCI also establishes that you have to be able to tell the changes that happen over time.
Like with files, like integrity monitoring technologies, right?
Exactly, right? So it's not a containerized application, or we don't have indication it's containerized here. So that means that change over time can actually happen. So how can you tell the changes that happens? Do you have a baseline that you can compare all of? PCI also determines that logs have to be secured, right? So an
Correct.
attacker can easily erase their trails
Remove those.
by removing the logs. So can you capture the logs automatically to a secondary location so an attacker cannot
That's a really
erase
good-
their trails? So
good
I
point.
think verifying what's running for malware, right? So say malware is the very basics of what needs to be verified. And it's too true to this day. Monitoring for integrity over time would be important. Also, inspecting the logs would be important.
Another aspect, when we talk about like share responsibility, I remember there is a really big concern that AWS brings to customers, right? The operation system and the application.
Yeah.
Those can have like vulnerabilities. And the most used technology for like you to prevent those kind of like flaws in the operation system and the applications, it is the what we call IDS and IPS technologies, right?
Exactly. Well, with IDS, IPS technologies, you can actually tell whether malicious traffic or malicious behavior is indicative of a vulnerability being exploited. So we don't see any systems.
Basically adding like a little secure tool here inside, right?
Yeah, add an agent there would be, it's easy to choose, so you still have the freedom of adding an agent. We don't see systems manager here, so there's no indication that you have an automated flow for patching. So your exposure time for patching could be bigger than necessary. So it's important that this tool is also able to shorten this exposure time to as little time as possible, right? So ideally, this would be an agent with
really
threat
good
intelligence.
Yeah, oh yeah, you touched on a very good point too, like threat intelligence. When you talk about threat intelligence, this kind of concept with like XDR capabilities can help you to find any possible suspicious activities that maybe it's not being prevented today, but we can associate that with like logs coming from the users, email, web gateways, and many other pieces in the business from customers, right? I think this is an awesome like way also to connect, like XDR.
Yeah, so in this area specifically, this is host telemetry that would be collected here, but there's all sorts of telemetry points that would be important to collect around here for better correlation, right? So the behavior of the APIs would be a good trail to have. So maybe you can have some means on CloudWatch. So important to be able to collect as much as possible so that you can correlate to a security incidents.
Yeah.
Very good.
Can move for the fourth one, right?
Yeah.
As a way, like in PCI DSS, there is a matter of like encryption that is a really important aspect, right?
Yeah.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, it is PCI 8.2.1. It is basically the enforcement of like encryption in every single services that you are using, basically. There's a lot of services here that you can enable encryption. But it's not because you have the possibility of like enabling encryption that you have that already deployed, right? Making sure that it is really important, right?
It's very important. There are definitely ways of telling whether a component here is unencrypted, and it's usually a high severity finding. But you gotta make sure, right, that once deployed, it remains encrypted.
Yep.
So what are components here that would
use encryption? Oh my lord, I think we have all, right?
Well, what are not, basically, right?
Yeah, I think S3 we have, I remember on top of my head, Glacier, RDS, EC2 with the EBS.
The EBS volumes here,
right?
the EBS volumes here. Well, encryption on transport here for the connection to the database.
CloudWatch for sure, we have the encryption too, and SNS on
SNS topics have to be encrypted.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, your transport should also be encrypted. This should be a fully
correct.
Ideally,
making sure the TLS.
Exactly.
Right?
Ideally, it's terminated down here, right? It's down on the instance level. Your VPN traffic from your users also going to be encrypted.
And this data here probably with the SFTP, they probably have already security on the traffic, right?
Could be, yeah. So could be client-side encryption, or it could be server-side encryption there on the EC2 instance. But how do we make sure that users don't have the actual access or permissions, the roles that you use?
That's the fifth, basically, recommendation here, right?
Yes. So in all of this, you don't want to be using hard-coded credentials, right? One of the key aspects of leveraging a good cloud architecture is to leverage as native as possible an authentication and authorization methods. So, for example, your EC2 instances, rather than baking in S3 access credentials, maybe you can use a role, an IAM role here. Yeah. What basically this means at the end of the day is your security your security posture is just as good as your IAM security posture.
And they have the like specifically boundaries, right? That's really important too.
You can enforce boundaries, right? So on an organizational level, to make sure that even if someone wants to or tries to expand the scope of permissions of an existing role or newly created roles, they're bound to this maximum perimeter of permissions.
Yep.
Very important aspects. But all right, so you're not necessarily there from the start, from when the moment the account is deployed. How do I make sure that the existing roles are not overly permissive here?
That's a good way, right? There's one way that you can find with CSPM to look for possible overly permissive IAM roles, right, and policies.
Yeah, so I think it's a great way, right? So you can look at what's out there, right? It's already here. You're going to list your IAM roles. The IAM API is great. You're able to then list the permissions of your existing IAM roles, your existing IAM policies.
Correct.
Make sure they adhere to the least privilege principle.
Really, really important. Least privilege access.
Exactly. So those EC2 instances here, they need to read from a bucket. What is exactly the buckets that they need to read from? Is it a single bucket? So do delineating a policy. That's the one bucket you have access to.
Right.
They don't need to write. I don't see on this, well, it looks bidirectional here, but it's not necessarily bidirectional, right? If they don't need write permissions.
Correct.
Remove
the
it.
EC2 can just grab the information here, right?
Just
don't
read.
need it.
Exactly.
For example.
So what else we could do here? Yeah, so RDS roles would be very important, right? Your EC2 instances should not have overly permissive roles when it relates to RDS as well.
Okay, I think we cover a lot of things here, right?
Yes.
Let's give like a good resume or like summary on this, right? First one, we talk about malware protection for S3 buckets.
That's correct.
Correct. The second one, we talk about like finding misconfiguration in multiple AWS services, but not in real time, but also shifting left and finding when you are building the infrastructure.
True.
Right? The third one,
protecting the instances themselves, right? So
Correct.
you're still using instances. You own the responsibility of patching the operating system. You own the responsibility of what can actually be executed. So make sure that you're able to tell what's happening on the instance, the activities that are going on there, that you can prevent bad codes from running, and that you can actually remove or get a copy of changes and logs that happens so an attacker is not successful.
Fourth, we talk about like the enforcement and the encryption in multiple services. Make sure you have that enforcement of the encryption. And the last one was the basically YAM and identity and access and permissions in the overflow like process in the AWS, right?
Maybe that's the most important one.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
There is not a single service here that's not reliant on IAM to make sure to be granted permissions to execute the desired task. So yes, for cloud architectures at the end of the day, it's always going to be about the authorization, the model. But as you could see here, right, we started with some key capabilities in place that are very good
native
to have.
already.
They're native, they're baked in. WAF, definitely a great capability. Security Hub should be able to aggregate all of those findings and possibly trigger automated remediation. We didn't talk about the possibilities of automatic remediation here with SNS, but that's a great key area point for you to maybe think about as the maturity of your architecture increases. What are the automated flows, right, that you can actually kick off? So what are the events you can watch, and how you can automatically respond to those events is an area of continuous improvement.
I think we can talk all day here around this for sure.
That's true. Yeah, it's good that we're looking at this example architecture first. It is a very common architecture.
Yeah,
right?
It is very common for like financial big transactions, right, on fintechs or financial services organizations. One of the things that we want to just do for closing, it is basically saying everything almost that we talk here today can be covered by like what we call a Trend Micro One. Trend Micro Cloud One technology. Sorry, not Trend Micro One.
Well, soon.
One sec. Let me just rephrase. let me close here now a little bit with like saying the Cloud One technology, right? It is our cloud security platform that you can basically consume and do most of the things that we cover here today, right? Basically, all the CSPM, the CWPP technologies that you can apply for the EC2s, the malware for like S3 buckets, all that kind of like security services can be used and consumed from the Cloud One platform. This is like a security platform that you can connect with your AWS infrastructure and easily deploy those services to starting adding security layers, correct?
And it's important that it's just like with your cloud services, discoverability is a key element, but also consumption is a key element. So
yeah.
we do allow for consumption with the platform. And it's not like you're going to be able to implement all of those security steps and security posture improvements in a one fell swoop. So it's important that over time, you're able to adapt to different architectures that are more or less cloud native. At the end of the day, it's important that you do those security improvements with as few pieces as possible, right?
Correct, for sure. Yeah, we cover a lot of things here, like in this episode. I hope you like it. I hope you're starting thinking about like how to improve your security layers, improve your security like tools that you are using today in AWS after this video here. But let's keep in like build securely, right? This is really important.
Let's build securely.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good one.